the handles have been ground down to meet the profile of the blade. I've got some pins set in here to hold everything in place. It's important that your pins be snug, but not so snug that they can't move around a little bit. You still have to have room for glue. We are about to put glue on this thing. The handle is still pretty rough. I like to do a lot of my shaping after it's glued on, as long as the design will permit. There's a bunch of factors that might force me to finish the handle before everything's glued on, but I feel like I'm gonna have to clean up the squeeze out of all the epoxy around here, and it makes a mess. It's a lot less hassle for me personally to be able to just go in and finish everything once and for all instead of having to do it over the course of the glue drying. So my way around that is I finish the very front part of the guard, and at this point the blade's got to be perfect and ready to go, because there's no going back other than burning this handle off with a blowtorch and starting over at that point. So what I'm going to do now is take my trusty paste wax and I'm going to smother all over the blade, up in this general area and up along in the jimping. I'm not going to bother with doing anything down here or along on the back of the tang, because that's going to all get ground flush anyways. But these areas in here where I'm never going to be able to get to again are now finished and ready to go. Once they have wax on them and that high buff, nothing is going to stick to it. And I just kind of wax the rest of the blade just to be safe. Never hurts. So, pop these off real quick, show you what we got on the inside. Okay. So, for glue, what we're going to have to do, make sure all of our pins are cleaned up. Gotta get all the oxidized layers off the brass, and I'm going to clean up the knife from here back. What I'm gonna do is rough this up very coarsely with 36 grit, as well as the inside of these. The key to a good glue bond is texture and surface preparation. Everything has to be really clean and really coarse for the epoxy. Now, on other things like wood glue and super glue, they all have their own thing. Wood glue has to, like, the pieces of wood have to be very flat and very smooth. It's pretty much the opposite for the epoxy. The more places it can fill up and grab into, the stronger it is. That's why we have these holes in the scales, and that's why we have the fuller in the tang. All that's going to provide this huge wad of epoxy that we're going to let, I don't know, just form this big tenon that fits into all these little mortisey pockets in the handles. So I'm going to get that all roughed up and cleaned out and make sure that the blade is 100% ready to go. And then I will mix some epoxy and I'll show you what I got after that. Okay? The wax on the handle and on the tang of the knife there has had plenty of time to dry. So I'm going to mix up the epoxy here. This is G-Flex from West Systems. I think this is the best stuff to use. Everybody seems to agree. There's a whole bunch of different glues you can use for this part of the process. I honestly think a two-part epoxy is the only way to go. This is gap filling. It gives me a bunch of time to work on it. Like if I mix too much of it and I need to come back in an hour, it's still ready to go. It takes forever to dry, but that's good. Good things take a long time, like this knife. It's taking days. So a little long time for some glue to dry, that's okay if it's never going to break. This stuff is made for fixing kayaks. It's waterproof and it's very flexible, and that's where it gets all its strength. Things like CA glue or the 5-minute epoxy and I don't know to any other extent, a glue that's, oh, JB Well, that's a great example. That's an epoxy, but it's very brittle. And this stuff, you can bend it, and if you're trying to break something and break it, it's just going to bend with the material, and therefore it won't break off. And never ever had a problem with this stuff. Love it. Other than that bottle is $60. I should say these bottles are $60. So, the next part here, I'm just gonna lather this in, and I want to make sure that I get in all these little nooks. And there's no air bubbles. I am going to spread some up front, but not a lot, because I don't want it squeezing out as much as possible. Do the same thing to the other side. I've heard tale of people applying epoxy with sandpaper. I've never done it. I guess it makes sense if you're roughing it up. I wonder what the dust does. I kind of think it might make like a cement type mixture, some kind of slurry that'll benefit the bonding process, but I honestly don't know. So I've never done that. If it works, sounds neat. Alright, so to make sure my thing goes in nice and straight, I'll put a pin up front, and a pin in the back, and the moment of truth. If you did everything absolutely perfectly, this will just slip on like that. Perfect. Alright, so plenty of glue in there, but I'm going to fill this fuller, which again will act like a big wad. It's going to bond through the holes and onto the other side. So even if your glue doesn't want to stick to the metal, it will stick to the fiberglass and in all the little holes inside the fiberglass. Then that in turn will be held together by the holes in the tang, and boom, you got one big wad of glue holding everything together. Alright. Let's slide the other piece on. Okay. I gotta get a bunch of squeeze out, so move this off to the side. Let's get something else here for a second. Okay. And at that point, just kind of get whatever fell off there. Slide that in. Ah! Ooh! Almost forgot. Secret legendary knife maker tip. You don't want to get glue in your lanyard hole. Stuff something in there. Then you can pull it back out and you're clean. Alright, that's it. Flood it with clamps. I just don't want to get my fingers sticky, that's all. I'm going to leave all that squeeze out, I don't care. Deal with that tomorrow. I might get that bit right there, but it's a lot. More clamps you put on, the more squeeze out you get. Squeeze out's good, that means you got plenty of glue. Except when you push it in there, tape around too much. So I am not going to wipe that off. All that squeeze out that just popped out into the nicely waxed and finished front area, I'm gonna leave that alone. I find that if you pick it off now, you end up wiping the wax off. And then over time, more epoxy is going to squeeze out, and then you don't have any wax. So if I wait till tomorrow, that bead's gonna be nice and dry, I can go in there with something and just kind of peel it right off the edge, no problem. So I'm gonna put this down for the night and we'll pick it up tomorrow morning and start shaping her and finish it up.